Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Bixler here, and we are going to talk about standard form and working with intercepts, which is very, very exciting. It's sort of the next step in our work with linear equations. So let's throw it back a little bit. And I want you right now to graph this equation. And I not only want you to write the slope and the y-intercept, which is what we've done in the past, but I also want you to take note of what the x-intercept is. So that's where our line crosses the x-axis. So go ahead and pause the video and graph this line. All right, we're back. So hopefully you got something that looks like this. Your slope is a half and your y-intercept is -4. And we know that this point, -4, is where our line crosses the y-axis. It's our starting point. And then we use our slope and we go up and over, up and over, and up and over. And then we get to something called our x-intercept. And this is where our line crosses the x-axis. So if you notice something right now, something really important is that our x-axis is when our line crosses our x-intercept is when our line crosses the x-axis, and that's when y is equal to 0. You don't go up and down anything. And our y-intercept is when our line crosses our y-axis, and that's when x is equal to 0. So that's a really, really important point here. So that's what I want you to notice. Ba-ba-da-ba. Okay, so again, your x-intercept right here is when y is equal to 0. Remember, the coordinates here are going to be 8, 0. That's when our line crosses the x-axis. And our y-intercept is when x equals 0. So the coordinates here were 0, -4. Cool? So x-intercept is when y equals 0. Y-intercept is when x equals 0. Fabulous. Done. Moving on. All right. So back in the day, how would you graph this equation? I want you to pause the video and figure out how you would graph this equation. Remember, you get it to look like y equals mx plus b. So pause the video and then we'll come back. All right, we're back. So what we talked about before was isolating y. And so you would subtract 4 from both sides, and then you would wind up dividing by -5. And you would get the equation that looked like this. And if you were graphing it, it would look something like this. You've got your y-intercept of -4, and then you go up 4 over 5, up 4 over 5, or down 4 to the left 5, down 4 to the left 5, right? So hopefully you should feel really good about that. But now life is getting so much easier. So remember, our y-intercept is when x equals 0, and our x-intercept is when y equals 0. So instead of having to go around and solve for y and subtract and then divide, and you're dealing with negatives and blah, 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 our life is so much easier. So if our y-intercept is when x equals 0, if I plug in 0 for x into this equation, I get 4 times 0 minus 5y is equal to 20. Now, what's 4 times 0? Just 0. So guess what? You can cover up my x term, and you just get -5y is equal to 20. And if I divide both sides by -5, I get y equals -4. So looky-loo. Here's my y-intercept of 1, 2, 3, -4. Interesting. Isn't that what I got on the previous slide? It is. All right. So now my x-intercept is when y equals 0. So if I wanted to plug in 0 for y, watch what happens. 4x minus 5 times 0 equals 20. Well, 5 times 0 is 0. So if I go to the original equation, I can just cover up this y term, and I get this. 4x is equal to 20. And if I divide both sides by 4, I get x equals 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this is what we call the cover-up method. Look, I've got my 2 intercepts. All I need to do is then draw my line, and I'm done. Give me a harder problem. Kind of cool, right? All right, so here's what you're going to do. When you are faced with an equation that looked like this, y equals mx plus b, this was slope-intercept form, right? You started with your b, and then you used your slope to rise and run and get your next points. But now, when you are given something that looks like this is our second type of equation. And this is what we call standard form or the cover up. So if I need to solve for my x-intercept, I cover up whatever whatever my y is, and then I solve. And if I want to solve for my y-intercept, I cover up what my x term is, and then I solve, which is kind of cool. So here's what I want you to do. I would like you to pause this video, and I want you to graph this equation using the cover-up method. Remember, the y-intercept is when x equals 0, and the x-intercept is when y equals 0. So pause the video, go for it. All right, and we're back. So hopefully you got something like this. Remember, if you are solving for the y-intercept, your x equals 0, so you can just cover it up. And you get 8y equals 16, divide, and you get your y-intercept, boom, is 2. And then alternatively, if you are solving for your x-intercept, your x-intercept is when y equals 0. I cover that guy up. I get 4x equals 16. And so x equals 4. Boom. There's my x-intercept. I draw my line. I'm done. Kind of cool. I love it. So now it gets a little tricky tricks. So now I want you to pause the video and graph these two lines. Tell me what your slope is, tell me what your y-intercept is, and tell me what your x-intercept is. So pause the video and go ahead and do it. All right, we're back. So let's look first at this equation, x equals 3. This is the blue one over on the right. I know it's a little confusing. So you know that the equation x equals 3 is when x always equals 3. So if I draw a line where x always equals 3, x equals 3 here, x equals 3 here, x equals 3 here, my line is vertical and its slope is undefined. I have no y-intercept because my line doesn't cross the y-axis, but I do have an x-intercept, and my x-intercept is 3 in this situation. So the other one is the equation y equals 5. So let's scooch this guy over. So y equals 5. My slope here, this is the red line, my slope here is 0, and I know that y always equals -5. -5, -5, -5. My line crosses the y-axis at 0, -5. And there's no x-intercept because it doesn't cross the x-axis, which is kind of cool. So that is it for standard form and for working with intercepts. Go ahead and tackle the homework. You're going to crush it, and we will see you soon. Thanks.